From the Cronkite studios in downtown Phoenix, this is Cronkite News.
Welcome to this Cronkite News Special Edition. I'm Crystal O'Connor. Thanks for joining us. Cronkite News is not only one of the largest news organizations in the state, we're the only news agency in Arizona with a permanent news bureau in the nation's capital. Tonight, a compilation of stories from our reporters based in Washington, D.C.
For just the third time in a decade and the second time in the last 3 months, the Federal Reserve is raising its interest rates. It's something that affects just about everyone, from homeowners to credit card users. Tonight, we get two reports on what this all means for Arizona. We begin in Washington, where Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen made the announcement today. Cronkite News reporter Z Zong is live in our D.C. bureau breaking it down for us. Z?
As many expected, the chairwoman announced this afternoon that the central bank is raising interest rate by 1/4 point. Analysts say the strong performance of the economy is the main reason behind the move.
Unemployment is almost at full employment, and inflation is back up to their target. Now, what they're probably most concerned about is in the next year or so, if the economy gets too hot, that would cause inflation. So they started raising the interest rate to stem future inflation.
Bill Hempel also said many day-to-day transactions can be in turn affected by the adjustment, from your savings account to car loans.
It's quite likely for the next couple of months that savers might start to see some increases in the rates they get on savings accounts or certificates deposits in credit unions and some banks. Borrowers might see some slight increase in the rates they pay on loans, especially shorter-term loans like, say, credit cards or car loans. But mortgage rates, which are long-term rates, those are 30-year rates, those won't necessarily go up because of this move.
Despite all the positive signs, Janet Yellen remains conservative about the economy moving forward.
Overall, we continue to expect that the economy will expand at a moderate pace over the next few years.
Many in the financial world saw today's decision as non-aggressive. The Dow gained over 100 points as a result. Live in Washington, D.C., Z Zong, Cronkite News.
Another agency targeted for cutting in the proposed budget is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. But emergency responders told the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee today that those cuts could threaten their ability to be prepared for a disaster. Cronkite News DC reporter Anthony Marroquin was at the hearing.
To cut the pre-disaster mitigation funds, that's whistling through the graveyard.
Or to put it another way,
not going to be any more floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. Don't worry about it. And by the way, don't call the federal government.
Because help may not be available, witnesses at a House hearing said today, pointing to a proposed budget that would cut funds for state and local governments for preparedness, staff, emergency training, and supplies. Help from the government that people have come to expect after a disaster.
The expectation that we've already established is that the government will come.
And experts fear they may not be able to keep pace with the needs of their communities in case of a disaster.
We really need to move to a more proactive model, and that means shifting dollars to pre-disaster mitigation.
The cuts are part of President Donald Trump's first budget proposal, which reduces Federal Emergency Management Agency's state and local grant funding by $667 million.
We are proposing a budget that will shrink the bloated federal bureaucracy, and I mean bloated, while protecting our national security.
The panelists agreed, now more than ever, it's important for community members to be aware of the hazards in their community and to be prepared for at least 3 days of isolation.
Don't fall back on or be comforted by what is available to you day to day, because that might not be there.
In Washington, Anthony Marroquin, Cronkite News.
Republicans say the budget proposal is only the start of the budget process and that things could change in the future. Republicans have long considered splitting the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers 7 states in the West, including Arizona. Today, Congress held a hearing on the debate, and Cronkite News reporter Z Zong has the details from Washington.
3 judges from the Ninth Circuit Court testified before Congress today that breaking up the court could be destructive.
Splitting the circuit would have a devastating effect on the administration of justice in the western United States. It would increase case delay, cause expensive, unnecessary, and and wasteful bureaucratic communication.
Chief Judge Thomas said if split, renovation costs in Phoenix alone would be over $100 million. However, Vanderbilt University law professor Brian Fitzpatrick thinks the size of the circuit is affecting its judicial decision-making, a fact reflected in the number of times the Supreme Court reversed the Ninth Circuit rulings.
There's no doubt the Ninth Circuit is an outlier in reversal rate. It is reversed much more often than any other circuit as a percentage of the appeals it decides.
Currently, Congress is considering 4 bills that attempt to split up the circuit into different configurations, and 2 of them are from Arizona Senator Jeff Flake and Andy Biggs. Similar efforts have failed in the past, but they're looking more optimistic in today's political climate. In Washington, D.C., Zizeng, Cronkite News.
It's been more than a year since the death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, and the man who has been nominated to take his seat faced the Senate Judiciary Committee today. Cronkite News reporter Anthony Marroquin is in Washington, where Arizona Senator Jeff Flake joined in the largely partisan grilling of Judge Neil Gorsuch on day one.
While the Supreme Court was in session today short-handed, members of Congress were at a hearing to decide whether to appoint Judge Neil Gorsuch as the new Supreme Court judge. Gorsuch is looking to fill the vacancy left by the late Antonin Scalia last spring. Stakes are high on Capitol Hill as the Senate begins what is expected to be several days of hearings on Judge Neil Gorsuch's nomination to the Supreme Court.
Our job is to assess whether he will protect the legal and constitutional rights of all Americans.
Republicans praised President Donald Trump's nominee and said voters were looking for a judge like Gorsuch.
The people chose originalism, textualism, and rule of law.
That was echoed by Arizona Senator Jeff Flake.
I'm excited to confirm a justice who reveres the separation of powers as a central principle of our Constitution.
But Democrats with fresh memories of Republicans' refusal to give a hearing to President Barack Obama's Supreme Court nominee, Merrick Garland, are having a hard time being convinced.
Committee Republicans met behind closed doors and declared that they would surrender the independence of this committee to do the majority leader's bidding, and they ignored the Constitution in the process.
Some also say Gorsuch's belief in originalism, interpreting the Constitution as the framers had in mind in 1789, has no place in the 21st century.
I firmly believe the American Constitution is a living document intended to evolve as our country evolves.
Still, Flake said Gorsuch's philosophy is a common and well-thought-out approach and praised the judge's conviction to interpret laws instead of making them.
With Judge Gorsuch, I think the record shows that we can be confident that he will read the law as written and not legislate from the bench.
The hearings are expected to go through the end of the week. We'll keep you updated on any and all major updates as they come. But for now, in Washington, Anthony Marroquin, Cronkite News.
Promise Arizona joined several other immigration advocacy groups at a rally in front of the Customs and Border Protection headquarters in Washington today. Reporter Anthony Marroquin was at the rally to find out why it was so important for those protesters to fly across the country for this.
And it wasn't just immigration leaders. Members of Congress also showed up at today's demonstrations to show their support for the nation's immigrants. Leaders from Promise Arizona said that they were excited about the energy levels at the rally, but that it's not just about showing up here. They're ready to take the fight back to Arizona.
Refugees are under attack. What do we do? We cannot let families be separated. We are not going to be divided.
Immigration leaders from across the country and members of the Senate brought their message of reform directly to Washington today.
Our job as members of Congress is to pass comprehensive immigration reform.
Promise Arizona members who flew out to participate in the rally at the Customs and Border Protection headquarters, among other events this week, said they came looking for solutions to a broken immigration system.
To make sure that Congress also does its job.
But they're not leaving everything up to Washington politicians. Manuela Aceverre, a volunteer with PAS, said activists need to take their fight for citizenship back to their communities.
It's very important for those who can to do it,
Today for them, then for ourselves.
A comment Petra Falcon, the group's executive director, mirrored, saying that Arizona's immigration community had won several battles in the past and that her organization would continue pushing for similar change.
We won by organizing our communities, by educating our communities, and about building our political power and expressing that message and our voices to all the way to the polling places.
We reached out to the Department of Homeland Security today for comment on the rally. We still haven't heard it back, but we'll keep you updated on our website. For now, in Washington, Anthony Marroquin, Cronkite News.
A Border Patrol agent's vehicle was damaged after being hit with rocks thrown over the fence at the U.S.-Mexico border near San Luis. Customs and Border Protection said the attack happened Monday after the agent arrested one of two people who had allegedly illegally entered the U.S. It's situations like this that have caught the attention of union leaders who spoke on behalf of agents at a Senate hearing on Capitol Hill today. As Cronkite News reporter Z Zung reports, representatives claim these Border Patrol agents sometimes face a thankless job.
Leaders of the Border Patrol unions painted a grim picture for the Senate Homeland Security Committee, one of an agency that has been understaffed, under-equipped, and overworked for years.
Imagine working up to 16 hours a day here for days on end with no relief in sight.
Brendan Judd, president of National Border Patrol Council, said many officers also felt abandoned by what they saw as a lack of support from the Obama administration.
Our own federal government has empowered criminals to feel that they're untouchable and that they can come to our country and do what they want to do.
Anthony Reardon said the agency currently faces a shortage of 3,500 officers, especially at ports of entry. While President Trump has called for 5,000 more Border Patrol agents, the union leader said there is little incentive for people to apply, and those who do face a cumbersome application process that includes an exceedingly difficult polygraph test. Still, they welcomed the idea of additional hires, and they welcomed Trump's idea of a border wall, with caveats.
We don't need a Great Wall of the United States. We do not need 2,000 miles of border wall. I will tell you, however, that a wall in strategic locations is absolutely necessary.
In Washington, D.C., Z Zung, Cronkite News.
We're kicking off coast-to-coast coverage on the battle over health care. Today marks the 7th anniversary of the signing of President Obama's signature health care bill, and Republican leaders were hoping this would also be the day when Congress voted on a replacement for Obamacare. But House leaders canceled that vote at the last minute today. Cronkite News reporter Marisela Ramirez was at the Capitol today to find out what happened with the American Health Care Act and what Arizona's congressmen are saying about it.
It's no surprise that Democrats oppose plans to replace Obamacare, but it was Republican Party infighting that forced House leaders to postpone a vote after they realized they didn't have enough support on this measure. Those divisions were reflected in Arizona's congressmen, who said the bill either went too far or not far enough.
It was a divisive issue from the beginning.
I'm looking for some real significant substantive changes. Yeah.
Biggs believes the replacement bill would not do enough to reverse the harm by Obamacare. Enough of his fellow Republicans felt the same way that House leaders had to delay today's vote.
They won't be able to afford the deductibles, and there'll be actually a reduction in health care.
Democrats also opposed the bill, saying it was more of a political move than an attempt to help the average American.
Well, it wasn't. It was a bill designed to give tax cuts to the rich. It was not to actually improve or replace the Obamacare or the Affordable Health Care Act, as we call it.
Congressman Tom O'Halloran said that 1 in 5 Arizonans rely on Medicare and that he was worried the AHCA would cut their access to those benefits.
We cannot have a bill that's going to hurt the health care network and the people of Arizona, and this bill would do that.
Still, the congressman said that he is still hopeful for a bipartisan effort in the future.
We don't have to have political solutions. We have to have solutions that are in the best interest of our families, our children, our small businesses, and the people of America. Thank you. Thank you.
Other congressmen that we spoke to on both sides of the aisle said they did not want to see the measure rushed and welcomed further negotiations. Those are continuing tonight, and the House could try again tomorrow. Reporting in Washington, Maricela Ramirez, Cronkite News.
A warning tonight from the Internal Revenue Service that could affect just about everyone. With millions of people set to submit their tax returns in the next few weeks, the IRS is worried scammers are looking to take advantage. As Cronkite News reporter Tyler Fingert found out, scammers have already swiped millions from Arizonans.
Tonight, the phone's ringing, but you may not want to answer.
This is in reference to criminal lawsuits filed against you.
It sounds legitimate, but the IRS says it isn't.
The tactics that are utilized by these scammers are not ones that the IRS would utilize.
Here's how it works. Scammers call potential victims saying they owe money, telling them they better pay up right now. But most of the time, that person doesn't owe a penny. The scam entirely based on fear.
They're able to trick people and frighten them into doing something that their common sense may tell them that they shouldn't do.
So far, scammers have stolen more than $50 million from consumers with the scam, but there's concern that number could go up.
We think our law enforcement action has made a dent in it, but I'm still concerned that it appears that it's starting to move back up and become more prevalent again.
In Arizona alone, more than $1.1 million was swindled from nearly 300 Arizonans in just the last 3 years. As of now, there's no end in sight.
These sorts of IRS ID theft scams and phone scams are going to continue because the income tax is a $1 trillion plus a year business.
A scam to watch out for, right in the heart of tax season, as scammers look to make a quick buck at your expense. In Washington, Tyler Fingert, Cronkite News.
The IRS has a few tips to avoid falling victim to one of these people. First, the agency won't demand that you pay taxes without first allowing you to appeal the amount you owe. Also, they won't force you to pay in a certain way, like prepaid cards. Finally, the IRS won't threaten to send police immediately for not paying. So if you get one of these calls, you may think it may be a scam, just hang up.
While many people are feeling down about the current political environment, some Arizona State students are getting more fired up about political advocacy. Reporter Anthony Marroquin met today with a group in Washington to see what they're doing to get involved and make a change.
Daniel Restrepo says growing up under the Obama administration may have made him a little complacent with the political system, but that he's ready to make a change.
I was kind of horrified, and so I kind of realized that was where I needed to step up and do my part where I hadn't been in the past.
He was one of over 300 other advocates in Washington this weekend for a workshop sponsored by Population Connection.
So we say, hi, we are constituents. We are all Arizona State University students, and we are speaking on behalf of Population Connection.
This morning, Arizona State University students took to Capitol Hill to talk to their elected officials about an executive order passed in January, which takes funding away from international groups that mention abortion.
Not too many people really dive in on what exactly needs to happen for reproductive rights, so somebody's got to stand up. So why not us?
But that wasn't the only thing they were looking to accomplish.
To take these materials and take information back home to better enable us to act in our own communities and in our own towns and cities.
And even more, to show that this is not an issue that they're willing to step back from.
If it is coming out to the Capitol to physically be here and physically speak to them and knock on their own office doors, we will be that generation. We will be that crowd of people. We will be those activists that's larger than just an issue. We intend to be a movement.
In Washington, Anthony Marroquin, Cronkite News.
After walking the halls of Congress today, those students were scheduled to head back home and bring their enthusiasm back with them. Ride-sharing company Uber's self-driving cars are back on Valley roads tonight, just days after a rollover crash in Tempe involving one of their vehicles. Cronkite News reporter Tyler Fingert brings us the latest on whether autonomous cars are actually safer.
Tonight, this crash is putting a renewed spotlight on whether driverless cars like this Uber will prevent accidents or potentially cause more. Uber says the car was in self-driving mode at the time. Tempe police saying Uber's SUV had the right of way and isn't responsible for what happened.
Couldn't have done much better myself.
This crash comes at a time when the technology is being closely looked at. Congress has already held several hearings on the topic in the last year, with more planned in the next few months. At a hearing last month on how Congress should regulate the cars, one expert told lawmakers the technology needs more testing.
It's like allowing teenage drivers on the road. They may not be safe drivers yet, but they need good driving experience to become safe drivers.
But in a survey out this month from AAA, 3 out of 4 drivers say they're afraid to ride in a self-driving car, with only 10% saying they'd feel safer sharing the roads with one. That's almost unchanged from a year ago.
While the safety advocates and highway advocates think that this is the new great frontier, it appears that drivers are really uncomfortable with the whole prospect.
In 2016, the National Safety Council estimated as many as 40,000 people died in car crashes nationwide. The council believes self-driving cars may be able to prevent some of those because more than 90% of accidents are human-caused.
At one point, it was just enough to survive the crash. Now we want to put in technologies that can prevent the crash from happening in the first place. That's where automated vehicles and advanced driver assist systems really can come into play.
The Uber crash is calling into question the safety of self-driving cars at a time when drivers want to tap the brakes on them.
There are a lot of things we don't know yet, but we do know that technology holds the promise for the future.
Tough questions for technology, still in testing. In Washington, Tyler Fingert, Cronkite News.
We did reach out to Uber for comment after they put their cars back on the road, but did not hear back in time for tonight's broadcast.
Tribal leaders are in Washington today to fight for their government's right not to be called an employer. Our reporter Anthony Matakin was on the Hill today to find out why this is such an important topic for Native Americans.
We both inherited this relationship, and you are our trustee.
A relationship tribal leaders are hoping to clarify with the passage of the Tribal Labor Sovereignty Act of 2017.
We are our own people. We have our own language. We have our own culture. We have our own way of life.
The bill would include tribal governments with federal, state, and local governments that are currently exempt from regulations as employers, a move some members of Congress said would allow tribes to finally thrive.
These enterprise zones ought to be allowed to flourish, and I would add the free speech of tribal governments ought to be allowed to flourish as well.
But union representatives are worried the bill would give tribal governments the power to ban unions from mobilizing on their lands.
Without that, there's not the incentive to work out these tribal labor relations ordinances.
But Nathaniel Brown, a Navajo Nation delegate, said in the Navajo Nation, workers and unions already receive plenty of protection. This is not about paying workers less, this is about gaining a little more independence.
They are protected, and I think this will just bring more to them, and this will just strengthen their sovereignty. So,
after all, he said, they are a separate nation. In Washington, Anthony Marroquin, Cronkite News.
All eyes were on Washington this week as President Trump's nominee to fill the open seat at the Supreme Court was voted on in the Senate Judiciary Committee today. Cronkite News' Tyler Fingert has a report tonight from the High Court in Washington.
The Supreme Court has been down at justice for over a year now, but at a several-hour-long hearing today, the Senate Judiciary Committee took the next steps to filling that open vacancy by approving Judge Neil Gorsuch. Today on Capitol Hill, the stage now set for a Supreme Court showdown. Judge Neil Gorsuch close to a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. The critical voting committee dividing Democrats and Republicans.
I cannot support advancing this nomination.
I will vote for him with a very clear conscience, for whatever that matters.
Judge Gorsuch's nomination moved through the committee on a party line vote. 11 Republicans for, 9 Democrats opposed. Just moments after, Senator Jeff Flake told reporters he's continuing to support Judge Gorsuch.
Judge Gorsuch is a great man and a great judge. I was proud to support him in committee and look forward to supporting him on the floor of the Senate.
Now some Democrats are calling for a filibuster. As it stands right now, the 60 votes needed to break a filibuster seems a long way off. But if Republicans can't get the 60 votes needed, they could use the so-called nuclear option, where they change Senate rules, allowing Gorsuch to get confirmed with a simple majority.
I'm going to vote to change the rules because I'm not going to be part of the Senate where Democrats get their judges and a Republican can never get theirs.
The entire Senate must now consider Judge Gorsuch's nomination. That's expected to happen sometime on Friday, but at this point it's a waiting game to see how all of this will unfold. At the Supreme Court tonight, Tyler Finger, Cronkite News.
Another day, another 83 cents. That's what women in Arizona might be saying tomorrow on National Equal Pay Day, a day that highlights the gap in earnings between men and women. Reporter Anthony Marroquin is in Washington today with new numbers on the decades-old fight for equal pay.
It's been over 4 decades since Michael Lieber started her fight for women's pay equity.
In college, that I would talk about the double standard. So I had the activist attitude back then.
Still, she doesn't see an end to the struggle anytime soon.
The estimates of when the gender wage gap will close keep extending.
New numbers from the National Partnership for Women and Families shows that women still made just 80 cents for every dollar a man made in 2015, a rate that has changed little in the last 10 years. Advocates say the stubbornness of the gap could be driven by a built-in bias in society.
In a perfect world, we'd have fathers and mothers that are responsible for their children in an equal way, but we still have more single parents, head of households that are women.
In the House, Congresswoman Martha McSally is leading a group to talk about what Congress can do to help the problem.
We've already talked about some of them, like increasing the child care tax credit. That's kind of a no-brainer. That's a federal level issue, and it hasn't been increased in years.
While McSally says the law needs to be updated, at least one Arizona business owner said last week that it's not just about the money.
Life is just too short to miss out on important events, even if it's just Johnny's first recital or Maria's first basketball game.
Despite the slow pace of progress, those small gains give Lieber hope for the future.
Frustration when one works on an issue this long, but you do see steps being taken.
At 78, she plans to continue the fight until equality is won.
I hope now to help for my granddaughters.
In Washington, Anthony Marroquin, Cronkite News.
That's it for this special edition of Cronkite News Tonight. For top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.